So thank you very much, Hollie, for taking part in this Tackling the Capacity Crunch in Accountancy webinar with me. We're going to start by a couple of introductions. So first of all, we'll introduce ourselves. I will carry on talking since I already am, but I'm the General Manager for the UK for Silverfin. I'm an accountant originally, back many years ago, probably 20 if I dared to count now, when I started in practice. Did that for about 4 or 5 years before moving to more commercial finance roles in a whole bunch of technology and SaaS businesses. You might be able to tell a little bit from my accent that I'm not from London or from the UK. I am from New Zealand originally and moved up a couple of years ago. So I've been with Silverfin for that time, and it's a great mix of that kind of finance and technology piece, which I love. I will also note from a generational perspective that I am a very early millennial. I think I'm often also called a Zennial, which is kind of on the border between Gen X and millennials. And the reason I note that will become clearer a little bit later, but we are going to talk a bit about the impact of how generational differences come about today as well. So I'm also joined by Hollie. So would you like to go through and quickly introduce yourself, Hollie?
Yeah, sure. So hi, everyone. So I'm Hollie. I am currently the Early Careers Manager here at BKL. I also am an accountant. So I started my career in a firm in the West Midlands about 10 years ago. Did my qualifications, moved to London and BKL just over 2 years ago, and sort of saw a gap in the industry where trainees are needing that little bit extra support. And so sort of created this job for myself, really interested in helping with the trainees and making sure that they sort of reach their career goals like I have.
That is awesome. Thank you very much. And even though I know it's completely rude, hopefully you won't be too offended, but what generation are you? Much younger than me, of course, but if you wouldn't mind sharing.
So I am smack bang in the middle of the millennials. So very much all of those traits.
Born with an early cell phone in your hand, right? That's the way. Very nice.
Definitely.
Cool. Awesome. Okay, cool. We will also introduce a little bit more about the firms we work for. So Silverfin, first of all, because that is the order of the slides, and we won't do it any other way. So we are cloud software for ambitious accounting firms with live client files, connected work papers, and AI you can trust. We are about 10 years old, or actually closer to 11 if anyone is counting, and been around spending a huge amount of time and effort trying to make accountants' lives easier by enabling them with technology. So we're now used by more than 800 accounting firms. A good chunk of those are in the UK, and of those we have, in addition to BKL, 30 of the top 100 UK firms as customers of Silverfin. So there's a lot more I could talk about that, but really the reason I wanted to introduce Silverfin quickly was to let you know why we're even here talking about this. And a lot of the value that we offer our customers is to enhance, as I say, the general work with better tools. And one of the key reasons why customers choose Silverfin is for the efficiency that we can provide, and therefore relieve a number of issues around capacity. So hopefully we are helping with this whole capacity crunch, and that's also why we think it's important to talk about. So in the same vein as we've just introduced ourselves, I'll also ask Hollie to introduce a little bit more about BKL.
Yeah, so BKL, we are a accountancy practice based in North London. Over the last couple of years, we've grown rapidly, more than doubling in size. In addition to that, we took private equity last April with big growth plans. So I, like I said, joined BKL in April 22, and quite early on sort of became the lead of our Silverfin project. So have worked very closely with Cam and the team over the last couple of years to sort of roll it out to our advanced business services team, which currently sits at about 100 members, but again, rapidly growing. So yeah, really good.
and therefore you have obviously a ton of experience in and around the capacity crunch. So let's get into the topic a little bit to crack on. So firstly, I will mention as well that we have written a white paper in and around this, and it forms the basis for the presentation that we're doing today, the webinar that we're running through. And we're diving into some of those topics that are discussed in a lot of depth in that white paper. So we wanted to focus on this because, as I say, we see the big issue that exists in the market's well documented, but really we wanted to turn and discuss a little bit more about the ideas how to handle it. So in support of the statistics that you can see on the screen, we also saw that ACCA released an even newer report in the current month that talks about work-related concerns for the future. And that topic was really interesting because they interviewed a whole bunch of accountants about their concerns and about the future and what's going on. Of that, the biggest or most common issue that was noted was in and around pay. So often that's the case. People are working in order to get paid. So it does come through at top place. But second and third were wellbeing and mental health as the second one. And then third was around workload and insufficient resources to carry out their role. So from that perspective, and to sort of summarize those points, number 2 and 3 really come down to a bit of a capacity crunch that we are seeing in the market, with the ability to have enough people to deliver the work, and not only to deliver it, but to deliver it in a great way that they can be proud of, that firms can be proud of, and that they can use to grow and move forward. I think we will crack into it a little bit deeper, but before we did that, we also wanted to get those of you on the webinar a little bit more involved. So what we're going to do is we're going to kick off a little bit of a poll, which asks the question. So we can see a whole bunch of evidence around the capacity crunch, and hence why we're talking about it today, why we engaged in creating a white paper, etc. But we wanted to know from those of you on the call, if you can answer whether you think it's getting much worse or not. So is there, yes, more pressure and risk of burnout? Do you feel like it's about the same, it's consistent? Or third option, no, it's reducing and life is a little bit less stressful these days. It peaked during pandemic times or things like that, and actually it's fine now, getting better. So if you want to hit the number on that, we will have a little bit of a view of what you all are thinking as well to carry on with. All right, I think we've got the votes in there now, so thank you very much for doing that. So it looks like a bit over 80% of answers are on the top item, which is yes, there is more pressure and risk of burnout, with the balance being around about the same, and no people choosing that it is reducing and that life is less stressful. So probably, I don't know, what do you think, Hollie, about what we'd expect to see?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, it's not reducing for sure. So, but this is why we're here.
This is why we're here, exactly. Okay, so good reinforcement that it is something that we should be talking about, especially in the vein of what are some of the challenges and how have people been handling them. So let's carry on then, and we're going to talk today about 4 of the challenges that we see as some big ones to highlight. And the first one on the list is around finding and securing the right people. So hiring is always, a big deal, and it makes, it can make and break firms for sure. But I thought I might just start with a bit of a question for Hollie. And what do you think makes a good person from a BKL context? What are you looking for in new applicants, and how has that changed over time?
So I think in the past, you wanted someone that was good with numbers. You really wanted that back office person. But I think with the introduction of tech and things like that, you want more of a personable person. I mean, people buy from people. So I think that personable aspect is definitely higher on the agenda. Obviously, you still need to have someone that's qualified or can do the sort of account side of things, but with the advisory, you definitely need to be that personable person.
So the days of relying just on numbers and grades are a little bit past. And I suppose that has impacts internally as well as externally, right? In terms of employee engagement, working with people and like-minded people, and internally too.
Yeah, definitely.
What about the second point on the slide around retiring seasoned professionals? So obviously, businesses, a lot of the businesses that have been built in the accounting firm space, done by people over many decades, and have been consistently led by a lot of the times those founding partners. What do you see happening in that space around retirement age for people earlier than our generation, let's say?
So I think for sort of retiring seasoned professionals, MTD, when HMRC brought that in for VAT especially, it really pushed people to get into the tech space and adopt Xero, QuickBooks, Sage to be able to do those VAT returns on the systems rather than just plugging in the numbers to the HMRC portal. So I think that sort of pushed those ones that maybe weren't interested in that change, maybe coming up to retirement, maybe brought it forward a little bit. Yes, there was definitely people that wanted to embrace that change and sort of grow with the industry. But I think especially MTD really sort of pushed a few people out. And also probably with the practices as well, whether people wanted to embrace that technological change or whether they were sort of not really interested in that and saw it as a way out.
A good excuse for a time for change, yeah. And there's a lot of ways that those are changing as well too, and especially at the smaller firm end of the scale where firms are being acquired, and clearly been involved in a bit of activity yourself on the mergers and acquisitions. So there's definitely different ways that technology comes into that side of things as well. So I think all of that activity can definitely use some bumps. And I must say as well, which I forgot to at the beginning, there is a Q&A function for those on the webinar. If you do want to ask questions of us or things that we should consider, please do use the functionality in Zoom to drop those in. If we have time when we get through the main content of the webinar, we can address them now. But even if we don't and run out of time, we'll circle back to them. So feel free to ask anything you like in that chat. The more entertaining, the better, obviously. So what about the demand side? So increasing demand. What are we seeing in the market? What is the latest view that you've seen around the ability to hire or find and secure the right people?
So I think it's more of an employees market at the moment. I think it's proving more difficult to find that person that you want, just because you want that rounded person that can do everything really. So from that, the demand of practices is increasing rapidly, just trying to get them in. Obviously, it's all about the capacity crunch. So we really are struggling to get them in, but
and I think we see that as well with a lot of our customers too. Generally, accounting firms are growing. There's generally more demand. There's more businesses out there, more businesses needing advisory work, more businesses needing support and compliance work from accountants and accounting firms. So it does all seem to be growing, and there aren't any or the pace of change has sort of perhaps not kept up at the current time, but we are seeing people looking for different ways and means of beating the capacity crunch because there is that crunch going on, right? And then what about existing employees? So mobility, where do you see people going, and how do you think that's changed over time?
So obviously a lot of people train in practice and then they venture off, and in recent years that sort of changed from just industry. Obviously lots of people have moved on to industry and worked in big corporate firms after training in practice, but with the development of tech and sort of that fintech environment, there's another option for people to diversify, and we are seeing a lot of accountants sort of moving off into that tech space. So for that reason, there's just so much more turnover because people are diversifying in lots of different ways rather than just having that option to go into industry in the past.
Yeah, nice. And what generally have you seen in terms of people's tenure and things at accounting firms? Because there's good reasons to be staying longer in terms of the work being more rewarding, if you don't have to be stuck doing sort of mundane pieces or really repetitive tasks. But then equally, there's a lot of different opportunities out there, and the generational differences that do exist as to how long people stay with firms is definitely a factor too. What's your latest view on that?
So I think it really depends on the person and what the person wants. So for example, with me at BKL, I decided that I wanted to diversify into sort of the training space, and that was an option. But some people just don't want to stay in practice. They just want that experience. And it really depends how they found their career up until that point of qualification. That's usually the turning point. And if people really like the technology side of things, the chances are they're going to go into fintech. And you've also got people that have no interest in progressing up to be partner, which is fine. We can't all be partners of firms. So there's just so many more options now in comparison to what there was maybe 10 years ago.
Nice one. We will crack on, otherwise we will potentially run out of time. We don't want to hold everyone up from carrying on with your afternoons. But challenge number 2 is around keeping people engaged. So this one, there's a few stats we're sharing on the screen out of some ACCA research primarily, but I wanted to talk a little bit first around work-life balance. Obviously, we had some big changes in what that means for people over time. In the very old days, that work-life balance wasn't even a concept. Then it turned up. Then it got technology had a big impact on it. Then pandemics have a big impact on it. What are you seeing as the latest demands in terms of work-life balance and how people are thinking about it when they're moving roles, when you're hiring new people these days? And also, I know you've recently attended a roundtable with ACCA in and around generation Gen Z and younger people. So what do you think about work-life balance in terms of current context?
So I think work-life balance, especially following COVID, where people sort of realise actually home life is important as well. It's really had a major shift in what people are looking for in businesses. They're not interested in doing 60, 70-hour weeks. They really want that balance between working and home life. Like you said, I went to a roundtable with ACCA, and there was actually some students that were actually in the Gen Z generation, and they were saying like work-life balance is key for them. That's definitely what they're looking for when they are looking at grad jobs. They want that flexibility in the workplace and just to be able to have that life. And they were mentioning how much it plays a part in their choices. Obviously, salary is key. You need money to survive, but that's not everything. And just the company culture all comes into play more so than just the salary.
Yeah, right. And what about you personally? You moved to London. When you were making that shift, what were you looking for in a role in a firm, in an organisation? What was important to you?
So for me, I have always said I want to be a person, not a number. So I didn't really look at top 10 really. I wanted to be in a place where I could make an impact. I could get to know everyone, and I think I have. With the Silverfin project, I sort of was forced to get to know everyone very quickly, and that's been great. And with the growth plan, it's culture is at the forefront of everything we do. So yeah, culture and the work-life balance and just general family vibes.
Yeah, nice, very good. And it's interesting you say about how making a difference and having an impact. I think that's also something that we see, particularly in younger generations, even younger than yours, that's increasingly important. And we'll get to that in Challenge 4 in a moment as well. But maybe we can skip on then to a bit about training, and this is right in your wheelhouse, right? So
Yes.
yeah, it should be a straightforward one, but if we want to start a little bit about technological skills and training in and around that, how do you see that as important in terms of capacity and how people are doing their work?
So I think with the technological skills, like we've said before, sort of the aging professionals is making sure that they are embracing the changes. But also the sort of trainees that are coming through is they are still learning the same theory as what people did 10 years ago. But a lot of the basics are being done by AI and technology. So I think one of the big things in the current climate is training those trainees to bridge the gap between the theoretical and the practical. It really is sort of showing that, yes, you can do it in theory, you know what you're doing in practice, but do you actually understand the bridge between those two elements? And I think that's something that's really important that we should be training our trainees, because they're going to be the advisors of the future, really. And do they really understand what's going on?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say, because it is a changing landscape, right? When you're historically doing a lot of say bookkeeping and that type of work where it's very kind of repetitive, and you're getting to know the numbers, like you're living and breathing each of the little details and transactions as you go along. Training to then know and understand the results and seeing the big picture there is different in a more modern time where technology is doing a lot of the easy and repetitive work. So training must evolve, I suppose, as part of that. When you're going, obviously, from a Silverfin perspective, we know that pretty deeply. And when we're talking to our customers and helping get on board and up to speed and working with people on training, it's a really big focus for us. But yeah, as you say, there's always a bit of a gap between theory and reality. So how do you think the professional bodies, the universities, and those other kind of educational sources are keeping up in today's world? How have you seen that more recently?
So I've actually been having a few discussions, and they sort of notice that things are moving and they need to adapt, but things change every day and it takes a long time to change a course. So, I mean, what they could put into practice today, tomorrow is irrelevant, because the industry's moved on so quickly. I know that it is at the forefront of their sort of minds that they do need to change, and it's really just making sure that we're working with them to sort of bridge the gap in the interim. But yeah, I would like to hope that in the coming years there will be more sort of impact on the technological side of accountancy to sort of help us out in practice, really.
Yeah. And I think as well, because the professional bodies are training in a continuous development kind of a way too, that they're training people in practice as well. It sharpens the focus, and they can keep up a little bit easier perhaps than some of the universities and that side of it. But just the last point on this slide around soft skills is a particularly interesting one. What are your thoughts on training people in a world where capacity is crunched from a soft skills perspective?
So I think soft skills goes back to sort of my point on the first challenge, being we're looking for a personable person. People buy from people, and building those soft skills will really sort of develop those people and develop them into professional advisors of the future. And I know that we have problems with our trainees that they're scared to pick up the phone because everything's done on text messages or on emails. So you just getting them to pick up the phone is a big challenge. But I always say to my trainees, fake it till you make it. I mean, the chances are the person on the other end of the phone isn't sure what you're going to ask them, and just say, sorry, I'll find out for you. There's nothing wrong with that. So it's just really ingraining that into them that you can do it.
Yeah, nice. It is certainly harder to build up relationships and deliver a level of advisory, in a talented way just via email, right? So yeah, for sure. All right. So on to the next one, and this is calling back a little bit to what we were talking about earlier about a desire to have an impact and have a contribution. So for yourself, not just being a number, but being an impactful person, which you absolutely are. So I just want to kind of pass over to you, and maybe can talk about a couple of things here on how that's being enabled with technology at BKL as an example, and we can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So like I've said, I took on the Silverfin lead of implementing Silverfin into BKL. So when I first came on board, we had 6 pods which made up the team, and each pod were working in a slightly different way. So it made it very difficult to sort of pass resource around. So what we have done is use Silverfin to sort of streamline processes and get consistencies across the whole team. So now we have grown and we are now 9 pods, but trainees or junior members of staff can be passed between pods because they do exactly the same work in each pod, obviously working for slightly different clients, but the general basis of what they do for an accounts process job is exactly the same. So that's been really good in sort of growing people, because you learn different things off different managers. So that really gives a benefit to the trainees that are still learning.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, thank you very much for that. That's cool. And we are nearing the half hour, but I thought we can also kind of wrap things up a little bit and connect a bit more with BKL by focusing on a few of the insights from your experience. So I suppose in this part, the attractive employer brand is a big deal for you, and obviously it even attracted you at the beginning too.
Yes.
So what's important to BKL from that perspective? What are the key elements?
So a big thing of our employer brand is our culture. Yeah, we're a very diverse team. We also are a B Corp, and we take that really importantly in the business, and it's making sure that people are considered as much as profit, and it's really evident for every person that comes into BKL that they see that culture and people are just at the forefront of the whole company. And as we are growing culture first, every time we sort of do culture surveys quite often to make sure that we're all on the same page, and it's just very evident, and it's just a really great place to work. So that really comes across in our employer brand.
Nice. And when you've been hiring people more recently, how have you seen technology come up? And the reason I ask is I was speaking to someone else in Silverfin yesterday, and they mentioned that they've had experience with a number of different tools, and internally we try and use the right thing for the right purpose to get the most value out of it. And this person told me that it's absolutely a key part of what they do, either researched independently online or becomes part of the questions during an interview process about what technology is in use, because it's such a big part of how people interact day to day, right? Is the tools and what they're doing. How have you seen that come through from an accounting firm perspective? How important is it to people?
So I think everyone wants to know sort of what tech we're using. I mean, for me, I wanted to go into somewhere that was using tech and not just using the very basics, but really embracing the technology and how much it can sort of improve processes and systems and efficiencies. And it does come up every single time. It's sort of like, what's your preferred software? Because you've got your Xero, your QuickBooks, your Sage, and everyone's got their preference. For me, it's Xero, but for other people, it might be something else. And yeah, I think it's just a really big part of our everyday work. I mean, we use software every minute of every day. So if you don't like the software that a company uses, it's going to become a problem. So
yeah. It can definitely have a big impact, right? And I think, you know, that's the challenge that we're constantly trying to attack at Silverfin as well, is to create software which will, you know, help people attract the right people, because it is something that that can be a positive rather than a negative, right? And we want to enable people to focus on the real value-adding pieces of their work and deliver and have the biggest impact that they can. So, you know, it's super important to us, and we look at it every day, and we live and breathe it from a Silverfin perspective as well, in terms of what we do internally. And yeah, as I say, people ask and people make decisions with that as part of their as part of it as well. So thank you very much there. I'm just kind of conscious of time as well. We're just past the half-hour mark, so we might kind of wrap up a little bit there. And I wanted to just sort of do that with this slide, and note that we're acknowledging the challenges that do exist. I think it's, you know, it's fairly well documented, and including you know, with sort of 80% plus of people on this call as well considering that. You know, that is a challenge to how the future will be, and we talked quite a bit today about how embracing technology is one of the ways that we can do that. And really, what we're doing there is trying to maximise from a people perspective impact that can be had, make things as attractive as possible, so that you know, the good firms are getting great people to do even greater things. And then finally, just to remember that you're not in it alone. You know, at Silverfin, we obviously put a big effort into helping and driving this forward, but equally from an accounting firm perspective and across the industry, I know, you know, peers are always talking and discussing about some of these challenges that exist. And so we should kind of get on with it, I suppose. And we're also just interested as well, of those people who have attended the call, if anyone's interested in hearing more about Silverfin, please jump on the poll, and we'll leave that one open if you are. And you can also, of course, read the full white paper that includes some great and more detailed opinions from Hollie herself as well. So thank you very much for that. Also, feel free to reach out to give us a call, both Hollie and I on LinkedIn as well, if you wanted to continue the discussion there. Very happy to receive that. And I might pass back to you, Hollie, to maybe give you the last word about what you think's happening from a, you know, technology and potentially even AI impact in the industry, and how that's working from a capacity crunch and how it's helping.
Yeah, so I mean, I get asked on a regular basis, do I think that AI and technology are going to make the accountant role redundant? And it probably will change sort of how the role actually happens and what is done on a day-to-day basis. But I think there's always going to be an element of advisory that's needed, and there's so many different options that AI couldn't possibly sort of come up with every discussion point. So even though the scope of the role of an accountant is going to change, I personally don't think it's going to be made redundant.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that. And given that we are at 5 minutes over time, thank you everyone who is attending, but we might just answer anything from the Q&A offline afterwards. But again, just a massive thank you to Hollie for joining us and sharing your valuable opinions, and a very big thank you to all the attendees as well. Thanks for your time. Hopefully it's been helpful, and look forward to hearing more from you in one of many of those ways. Thanks all.
Thanks for having me. Thanks all.